The screaming started at 0347 hours, ship time. Not the usual kind of screaming you'd expect on a prisoner transport vessel. Mind you, this was different. This was the kind of sound that made hardened soldiers stop dead in their tracks and question everything they thought they knew about the universe. Sergeant Kane Reeves pressed his palm against the cold metal wall of Corridor 7, feeling the vibrations of that otherworldly wail travel through the ship's hull like a living thing. His jaw clenched as he counted the seconds. 47 minutes now. 47 minutes of nonstop, ear-splitting chaos that had turned a routine prisoner transfer into something resembling a descent into madness. "Sweet Mother of Mercy," muttered Private Torres, covering his ears with both hands. "What in the hell is that thing?" Kane shot him a look that could have melted steel. "That thing, Torres, is a baby. An alien baby, but a baby nonetheless." He paused, listening to another wave of the creature's distress. "And if you call the thing one more time, I'll personally introduce you to the airlock." The truth was, Kane didn't know what to make of their situation either. 3 days ago, they'd been tasked with transporting a group of Zephyrian refugees to the neutral zone. Standard procedure. Boring, even. The Zephyrians were a peaceful species, tall and graceful with their silvery skin and luminous eyes. They'd been caught in the crossfire of a territorial dispute between the Galactic Alliance and the Hegemony Coalition. What Command hadn't mentioned was that one of the refugees was a mother with a newborn. Kane pushed himself off the wall and started walking toward the source of the commotion. His boots echoed against the metal flooring, each step measured and deliberate. Behind him, Torres scrambled to keep up, his nervous energy practically radiating off him in waves. "Sarge, maybe we should just, I don't know, put them in a different section, away from the others." Kane stopped so abruptly that Torres nearly crashed into him. "Really, Torres? That's your solution? Segregate a mother and her crying baby because they're inconveniencing us." The sarcasm in his voice was thick enough to cut with a knife. "Tell me, what's your plan for when Command asks why we separated refugees without authorization?" Torres opened his mouth to respond, then thought better of it. Smart man. The crying grew louder as they approached the refugee quarters. Kane could hear other voices now, too. Frustrated murmurs in various languages, some human, some not. The stress was getting to everyone. Through the reinforced glass of the observation window, Kane could see the chaos unfolding inside. The Zephyrian mother, Lyra, sat hunched in the corner, her silver skin pale with exhaustion. Her baby, wrapped in what looked like shimmering fabric, was red-faced and screaming with lung capacity that defied its tiny size. Around them, other refugees huddled as far away as possible. Some covered their ears. Others shot accusatory glances at the mother. A few humans were openly complaining to anyone who would listen. "This is insane," one of them was saying. "We can't take 3 more days of this. Someone needs to do something." Added another, "We're all going to lose our minds." Kane watched Lyra's shoulders shake with what he assumed were sobs. The universal language of a mother at her breaking point. He'd seen it before, back on Earth, during the settlement conflicts. Desperation looked the same across all species. "Sarge." Torres' voice was quieter now, uncertain. "What do we do?" Kane studied the scene for a long moment. The baby's cries seemed to be getting more intense, if that was even possible. Other refugees were starting to pace. The tension in the room was building like pressure in a faulty reactor. "We do our job, Torres. We maintain order and protect our passengers." He turned away from the window. "All of them. But how? I mean, we can't exactly court-martial a baby." Despite everything, Kane almost smiled at that. "No, Torres, we can't. But we can figure out why that baby is crying and do something about it. You know about babies, Sarge?" Kane's expression darkened. "I know about a lot of things, Torres, including the fact that babies don't cry for 47 minutes straight without a damn good reason." They continued down the corridor, past the other holding areas. Kane's mind was racing, trying to piece together the puzzle. Zephyrian physiology was different from human, but the basics were the same. Babies cried when they were hungry, tired, uncomfortable, or in pain. Lyra had been trying to feed the child when the crying started. So not hunger. The baby had been sleeping before that. So not tiredness, which left uncomfortable or pain, or something else entirely. Kane stopped at the service panel and pulled up the ship's environmental controls. Torres, what do you know about Zephyrian homeworld conditions? Standard breathable atmosphere, slightly higher humidity than Earth norm, lower gravity. Torres paused, thinking. Oh! And they're from a binary star system. 2 suns. Meaning they're used to a lot more light than we are. Kane nodded grimly. And what's the lighting like in the refugee quarters? Torres's eyes widened as understanding dawned. Standard ship lighting. Dim. Designed for human comfort during long voyages. Exactly. Kane's fingers flew over the control panel. For a species that evolved under 2 suns, our comfortable lighting is probably like being trapped in a cave. So the baby is crying because it's too dark. Among other things, probably. Kane pulled up the atmospheric controls next. Humidity is also 20% below Zephyrian normal. Temperature is 5 degrees too cool. And the air recycling system is designed for human metabolism, not Zephyrian. You think that's enough to make a baby cry like that? Kane looked at him seriously. Torres, have you ever been really, truly homesick? Sure, I guess. Now imagine you're 3 days old and everything around you is wrong. The air feels wrong. The temperature is wrong. The light is wrong. You can't communicate except by crying, and nobody understands what you need. Kane paused. How loud do you think you'd scream? Torres was quiet for a moment. Pretty loud, I guess. Exactly. Kane made adjustments to the environmental controls, increasing the lighting, humidity, and temperature in the refugee quarters. Not enough to make the human refugees uncomfortable, but enough to make the Zephyrian baby feel more at home. Will that work? Torres asked. Maybe. Probably not completely, but it might help. Kane closed the control panel. There's something else, though. Something we're missing. They made their way back to the observation window. The changes were already taking effect. The lighting in the refugee quarters had brightened noticeably, and Kane could see some of the tension leave Lyra's shoulders as the temperature and humidity adjusted. But the baby was still crying. Kane frowned, watching the infant thrash in its mother's arms. There was something about the way it moved, the way it seemed to be reaching for something that wasn't there. Torres, pull up the medical files on our refugees, specifically the Zephyrians. Sarge, that's classified medical information. Torres, I'm the ranking officer on this transport, and I have a security concern. Pull up the files. Torres hesitated, then activated his tablet. After a few moments of scrolling, he found what Kane was looking for. Okay, here we go. Lyra Kethera, age 26 standard years, recently gave birth to O. What? Her husband, Jorah Kethera, was killed in the territorial dispute 2 days before the birth. Kane felt something cold settle in his stomach. The baby never met its father. No, sir. And according to this, Zephyrian infants undergo a bonding process with both parents in the first few days of life. It's apparently crucial for their psychological development. And if they don't get that bonding? Torres, read further. It says here that the infant can experience severe distress, manifesting as inconsolable crying, feeding difficulties, and in extreme cases, failure to thrive. Kane stared through the window at Lyra and her baby. The pieces were falling into place now. The environmental factors were only part of the problem. The real issue was that this baby was crying for a father who would never come. Torres, what else does it say about the bonding process? Let me see. Okay, it says that in cases where one parent is unavailable, the bonding can sometimes be achieved through a surrogate. Someone who can provide the missing psychological connection. A surrogate? Yeah, but it has to be someone the mother trusts completely. Someone who can. Torres trailed off, looking uncomfortable. Someone who can what, Torres? Someone who can provide the emotional resonance that the missing parent would have provided. It's not just about holding the baby, Sarge. It's about connection, understanding. Kane was quiet for a long moment, watching Lyra rock her crying infant. The other refugees were getting more agitated by the minute. He could see the situation escalating. could feel the potential for violence building in the air like electricity before a storm. "Sarge, what are you thinking?" Kane didn't answer immediately. He was thinking about choices, about duty, about the fact that he'd signed up to protect people, all people, regardless of species or circumstance. He was also thinking about the baby he'd never had, the family he'd never started, the life he'd put on hold for the sake of serving in the military. "I'm thinking, Torres, that sometimes doing your job means doing something that isn't in the manual." "Sir," Kane took a deep breath. "I'm going in there." "Sarge, I don't think that's a good idea. The other refugees are already on edge, and if you go in there..." "Torres, that baby has been crying for 47 minutes. The mother is exhausted. The other refugees are getting hostile, and we still have 3 days left on this transport." Kane looked at him steadily. "Something has to change, or we're going to have a full-scale riot on our hands." "But what can you do?" Kane smiled grimly. "I can try to be what that baby needs. A father figure. Someone strong and stable and safe. You don't know anything about Zephyrian babies." "No, but I know about babies in general. And I know about being responsible for people who can't take care of themselves." Kane started toward the door. "Besides, what's the worst that could happen? The baby keeps crying?" Torres followed him reluctantly. "The worst that could happen is that you make things worse and command court-martials you for unauthorized contact with refugees. Then I guess we better make sure it works." Kane palmed the access panel, and the door to the refugee quarters slid open. The sound of the baby's crying hit him like a physical force, and he had to resist the urge to cover his ears. The room fell silent except for the infant's wails. Every eye turned to look at him. The humans looked hopeful. The other aliens looked curious. Lyra looked up at him with those luminous Zephyrian eyes, and Kane saw something there that made his chest tighten. Desperation. The same look he'd seen in the eyes of soldiers who'd lost their entire unit. The look of someone who had nothing left to lose. Kane approached slowly, hands visible and non-threatening. "Ma'am, my name is Sergeant Kane Reeves. I'm wondering if I might be able to help." Lyra's voice was barely a whisper, hoarse from exhaustion. "You cannot bring back my husband." "No, ma'am, I cannot. But I might be able to help your baby." She looked at him skeptically. "You know of Zephyrian infants?" "I know that your baby is crying for its father, and that it won't stop until it finds what it's looking for." Kane crouched down so he was at eye level with her. "I also know that sometimes, when a father isn't available, another male figure can provide what the baby needs." "You would do this? Why?" Kane considered the question. Why would he? Duty? Compassion? The simple fact that he couldn't stand to listen to a baby cry? "Because it's the right thing to do," he said finally, "and because no child should have to suffer for the sins of adults." Lyra studied his face for a long moment. Then, slowly, she extended her arms, offering him the baby. Kane had held babies before, but never an alien one. This infant was lighter than he'd expected, with skin that seemed to shimmer in the improved lighting. Its cries were even louder up close, but there was something else, too, a desperation that went beyond mere discomfort. "Hello there, little one," Kane said softly, adjusting his grip. "I know you're scared. I know nothing feels right, but you're safe now." The baby's cries didn't stop, but they did change. Less frantic, more questioning. Kane began to pace slowly, rocking the infant gently. "Your father isn't here, but I am, and I promise you, little one, that I will keep you safe until you don't need me anymore." Gradually, impossibly, the cry began to subside. The silence was almost more shocking than the crying had been. Kane stood in the middle of the refugee quarters, holding a Zephyrian infant who had finally, mercifully, stopped screaming. The baby's large, luminous eyes were fixed on his face with an intensity that was both unsettling and oddly moving. "Well, I'll be damned," Torres whispered from behind him. "It actually worked." "Don't jinx it," Kane muttered, but he was smiling. The relief in the room was palpable. Other refugees were letting out sighs of exhaustion, finally relaxing for the first time in hours. Lyra looked up at him with an expression of wonder mixed with exhaustion. "How did you—" "Sometimes babies just need to know someone's in charge," Kane said, still rocking the infant gently. Someone who won't panic when they cry. Someone who'll stay calm no matter what. The baby made a soft, cooing sound, tiny fingers grasping at Kane's uniform. There was something almost hypnotic about those silver eyes, something that made Kane feel like he was being evaluated and found acceptable. The bonding process, Lyra said quietly. It has begun. Kane looked at her sharply. What exactly does that mean? It means, Sergeant Reeves, that my son now considers you his father figure. In Zephyrian culture, this is not something that can be undone easily. His father figure? Kane felt a flutter of something he couldn't quite identify. Panic? Pride? But I'm just a soldier. I don't know anything about raising kids, especially alien kids. You know enough, Lyra said simply. You answered his need when no one else could. That is what fathers do. Torres cleared his throat. Sarge? Not to interrupt this touching moment, but what happens now? I mean, we can't exactly adopt an alien baby. Kane looked down at the infant in his arms. The baby was relaxed now, making soft gurgling sounds that were infinitely preferable to the screaming they'd endured. But Torres was right. What happened now? We finished the mission, Kane said finally. We get these refugees to safety, and then we figure out the rest. Sir, with respect, I don't think it's going to be that simple. As if to prove Torres's point, the baby began to fuss again. Not the ear-splitting screams from before, but a definite sound of discontent. What's wrong now? Kane asked, looking to Lyra for guidance. He is hungry, she said, reaching for the baby. I must feed him. Kane hesitated before handing the infant back. The moment the baby left his arms, the crying started again, not as intense as before, but clearly distressed. He does not want to leave you, Lyra observed. The bonding is stronger than I expected. Can you feed him while I hold him? Lyra nodded, and they worked out an awkward arrangement where Kane continued to hold the baby while she fed him. It was clumsy and uncomfortable, but it worked. The infant settled down, eating contentedly while maintaining contact with his newly bonded father figure. This is insane, Torres muttered, but he was smiling. Command is never going to believe this. Kane was beginning to realize that Torres was right about more than just Command's potential reaction. The logistics of their situation were becoming clear. They still had 3 days left on the transport, and if the baby couldn't be separated from Kane without distress, that meant, I'm going to be holding this baby for the next 3 days, aren't I? Probably, Lyra said, not sounding particularly sorry about it. Kane sighed. Torres, you're going to have to cover my duties. And get someone to bring me a chair. A comfortable one. Already on it, Sarge. As Torres left to make arrangements, Kane found himself alone with Lyra and her son. The other refugees had settled back into their own conversations. The crisis apparently over for now. What's his name? Kane asked. Zaylen, Lyra replied. It means bright hope in our language. Zaylen, Kane repeated, looking down at the baby. Well, Zaylen, you've certainly made an impression on everyone. The infant seemed to respond to the sound of his name, looking up at Kane with those remarkable eyes. There was something almost ancient in that gaze, as if the baby was seeing more than just a human face. Sergeant Reeves, Lyra said quietly, I must ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Shoot. When we arrive at the neutral zone, what happens to us? To Zaylen? Kane had been dreading this question. The truth was, he didn't know. Refugee processing was handled by civilian authorities, not the military. Families were often separated, sent to different colonies based on available resources and political considerations. I don't know, he admitted. The civilian authorities will make those decisions. And if they decide to separate us, if they send Zaylen to one colony and me to another, Kane's jaw tightened. That won't happen. You cannot guarantee that. Maybe not, but I can damn well try to prevent it. Lyra studied his face. You would do that? Even though we are strangers. Kane looked down at Zaylen, who was now sleeping peacefully in his arms. You're not strangers anymore. Family doesn't abandon family. Family? Yeah. Well, apparently I'm this kid's father figure now. That makes you. Kane paused, realizing what he was saying. That makes you family, too. Lyra's eyes widened. Sergeant Reeves, you cannot possibly understand what you are saying. In Zephyrian culture, when a male bonds with an infant in the absence of a biological father, it creates obligations, responsibilities. What kind of responsibilities? The kind that last a lifetime. Kane was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. A lifetime of responsibility to an alien woman and her child. It should have terrified him. Instead, he found himself oddly calm about the prospect. Would that be so bad? He asked finally. Lyra blinked, clearly not expecting that response. You would accept such a burden? Who says it's a burden? Kane adjusted his grip on the sleeping baby. I've spent the last 15 years of my life protecting strangers. Maybe it's time I protected someone who actually matters to me. But your career, your life? My career is following orders and keeping people safe. My life is... Kane paused, considering. My life is what I make it. Torres returned with a comfortable chair and a tablet full of messages. Sarge, I got good news and bad news. Bad news first. Command wants a full report on the, quote, unusual circumstances aboard the transport. And the good news? Captain Morrison is apparently more interested in the fact that we solved the problem than in the methods we used. She wants to speak with you when we arrive, but it doesn't sound like a court-martial kind of conversation. Kane nodded. What else? Medical wants to monitor the baby's condition. They're fascinated by the bonding process. Over my dead body. That's what I told them. Torres grinned. I may have mentioned that separating you from the baby might result in a return to the screaming. Good man. The next few hours passed in relative peace. Kane sat in his chair, holding Zaylin, while Lyra rested nearby. The baby slept most of the time, waking only to eat or when Kane shifted position too much. It was during one of these feeding sessions that Lyra brought up something that had been bothering Kane. Sergeant Reeves, may I ask you something personal? Sure. You handled Zaylin's distress very well, almost as if you had experience with inconsolable children. Kane was quiet for a moment. I had a younger brother. Much younger. There was a significant age gap, and our parents both worked long hours. I ended up taking care of him a lot. Where is he now? He died in the first wave of the hegemony attacks. He was stationed on Kepler Station when it was destroyed. Lyra's expression softened. I am sorry for your loss. It was a long time ago. Kane looked down at Zaylin. But I remember what it was like being responsible for someone small and helpless. The weight of it. Is that why you never married? Never had children of your own? Kane considered the question. Partly, it's hard to start a family when you're always being shipped off to different corners of the galaxy. And after what happened to my brother, he shrugged. I guess I decided it was easier to protect strangers than to risk losing someone I cared about again. And now I'm sitting here holding an alien baby who's decided I'm his father, talking to his mother about lifetime commitments. Kane smiled ruefully. Life has a sense of irony, doesn't it? Zaylin chose that moment to wake up, looking around with those bright eyes before focusing on Kane's face. The baby reached up with one tiny hand, fingers brushing against Kane's cheek. He knows you, Lyra said softly. The bonding is complete. Kane felt something shift inside his chest, something warm and protective and fierce. Yeah, I think it is. The rest of the journey passed without major incident. Kane spent most of his time holding Zaylin, learning the baby's rhythms and preferences. Torres handled the security duties, checking in regularly with reports and updates. On the final day, as they approached the neutral zone, Kane found himself dreading their arrival. Once they docked, everything would change. There would be questions, paperwork, decisions to be made about the refugees' futures. Sergeant Reeves, Lyra says they watched the space station grow larger through the viewports. I need to tell you something. What is it? When we arrive, the authorities will want to separate us. Standard procedure is to house single mothers with children in one facility, while unattached males are processed elsewhere. Kane's grip on Zaylin tightened. They can't do that. The baby needs both of us. They can and they will. Unless what? Lyra took a deep breath. Unless we are not separated, unless we present ourselves as a family unit. Kane stared at her. You mean? I mean a bonded pair. A family. In Zephyrian culture, the bonding process you underwent with Zaylen creates legal obligations. If we claim those obligations, if we present ourselves as a bonded family unit, they cannot separate us. Are you asking me to marry you? I am asking you to save my son. Our son. Kane looked down at Zaylen, who was watching him with those knowing eyes. The baby reached up again, tiny fingers grasping at Kane's uniform. What would that mean exactly? This bonded pair thing. It would mean that legally, we are considered a family unit. We would be housed together, processed together, and ultimately settled together. It would mean that Zaylen would have both parents, and that none of us would be alone. Kane was quiet for a long moment. And personally, what would it mean personally? Lyra met his eyes. It would mean that we are partners in raising this child. It would mean trust, cooperation, and mutual respect. It would not necessarily mean other things, unless both parties desired it. A marriage a convenience. A family a necessity. Kane looked around the refugee quarters, at the other families huddled together, at the uncertainty in their eyes. He thought about his brother, about the family he'd never had, about the life he'd spent protecting strangers. What I need to do. Relief flooded Lyra's face. When we dock, we present ourselves as a bonded family. I will speak for us in the cultural aspects. You will speak for us in the legal aspects. We will request joint processing and joint settlement. And if they refuse, then we make it clear that separating us will result in significant distress to the child. Medical documentation of the bonding process should support our case. Kane nodded. Torres isn't going to believe this. As if summoned by his name, Torres appeared at Kane's elbow. Sarge, we're about to dock. You ready for this? Kane looked down at Zaylen, then at Lyra, then at Torres. Torres, how do you feel about being the best man at a very unusual wedding? Torres's eyes widened. Sir, long story. I'll explain later. Right now, I need you to help me convince the authorities that this is the best solution for everyone involved. This is insane, Torres muttered, but he was grinning. Command is definitely not going to believe this. Kane stood up, still holding Zaylen, and looked around the refugee quarters one more time. In a few minutes, they would dock, and everything would change again. But for the first time in years, Kane wasn't dreading the unknown. He was looking forward to it. Come on, family, he said to Lyra and Zaylen. Let's go start our new life. As they walked toward the docking bay, Zaylen made a soft, contented sound and settled more comfortably in Kane's arms. Behind them, Torres was already composing his report in his head, shaking his head in amazement. Outside the viewports, the space station loomed larger, representing not an ending, but a beginning, a place where a human soldier, an alien mother, and a baby who brought them together could figure out what it meant to be a family. It wasn't a life Kane had planned, but as he looked down at Zaylen's peaceful face, he realized it might just be the life he'd always needed. The crying had stopped. The family had begun. And somewhere in the depths of space, the universe smiled at the strange ways that love could bridge the gaps between worlds.